ever wondered what it was really like to be a knight in shining armor? We all have this image from movies and legends. Noble heroes, riding majestic horses, rescuing damsels, and living in glorious castles. But what if I told you that most of what you believe is a fairy tale? The real life of a medieval warrior was brutal, bloody, and far from glamorous. Forget the storybooks! Today, we're diving deep into the harsh, gritty, and often shocking reality of what it truly meant to be a knight. Stick around, because by the end of this, you'll never see knights the same way again. Let's start by shattering the biggest myth of all: the noble, invincible hero. While the idea of chivalry and honor was certainly promoted, the reality on the battlefield was a different story. Knights were, first and foremost, elite heavy cavalry, the medieval equivalent of a main battle tank. Their primary job wasn't poetry or courtly love. It was to break enemy lines and create chaos. In the heat of battle, survival instincts often trumped any code of honor. They were highly trained soldiers living in a violent world, and their lives were defined by constant conflict, not just grand tournaments. The romantic image we have is largely a product of later stories, written long after the last true knights had laid down their swords. The truth is, they were professional soldiers in a brutal age. So, how did one become a knight? It wasn't a job you simply applied for. For the sons of nobility, the journey began at the tender age of 7. At this age, a boy would be sent away from his family to serve as a page in the household of another lord or a powerful relative. This wasn't a life of luxury. As a page, his days were filled with chores and lessons. He learned courtly etiquette, music, and reading. But more importantly, he began the grueling physical training that would define his life. He learned to handle small, blunted wooden swords, practice his balance, and care for the knight's equipment. Every moment was a lesson in discipline and obedience. Any mistake, any sign of weakness, could result in harsh punishment. This wasn't just education. It was an intense vetting process designed to forge a boy into a future warrior, weeding out those who couldn't handle the pressure. Around the age of 14, if a page had proven his worth, he would graduate to become a squire. This is where the training intensified dramatically. A squire was essentially a knight's personal attendant and apprentice. He was responsible for his master's armor, weapons, and warhorse, all incredibly valuable assets. He would follow his knight into tournaments and even into real battles, tending to his needs, handing him fresh weapons, and assisting him if he fell. In return, he received direct, hands-on combat training. He learned to fight in full armor, mastered the lance on horseback, and wield a variety of deadly weapons, from the longsword to the warhammer. Squires were on the front lines of medieval life, experiencing the realities of combat firsthand. It was a dangerous apprenticeship, where one wrong move could mean death. But it was the only path to earning his spurs and finally becoming a knight. Now, let's talk about the iconic suit of armor. In our minds, it's a gleaming symbol of power. In reality, it was a 60-pound metal prison. A full suit of plate armor was an incredible piece of technology for its time, custom fitted to the wearer. But it was also incredibly cumbersome. Just moving around was a workout, let alone fighting. It was hot. It limited your vision and hearing. And if you fell on your back, getting up without help was nearly impossible. And the cost, a suit of armor was astronomically expensive, equivalent to the price of a luxury car or even a small estate today. Only the wealthiest nobles could afford it. This meant that the image of an army of knights in shining armor is misleading. A medieval army would have a small number of fully armored knights, supported by a much larger force of less equipped soldiers. Their armor made them formidable, but it also made them a prime target. Of course, the armor was just one part of a knight's toolkit. Their weapons were extensions of their will, designed for one purpose: lethality. The longsword was the classic sidearm, a versatile weapon for both cutting and thrusting. But on a chaotic battlefield against other armored opponents, a sword wasn't always the best tool. Knights also carried brutal weapons, like the mace and the warhammer. These were designed to crush and concuss, to defeat armor not by cutting through it, but by transferring sheer blunt force through the steel. Then there was the lance, the primary weapon of the mounted charge. A group of knights charging with lances lowered was the most devastating tactic of the early medieval period. Capable of shattering infantry formations like glass, these weren't ceremonial objects. They were the daily tools of a violent trade. So where did these warriors live? Forget the luxurious, sprawling castles you see in fantasy films. A real medieval castle was first and foremost a military fortress. It was designed for defense, not comfort. The stone walls made them cold, damp, and drafty. Windows were small slits designed for archers, not for letting in sunlight, so the interiors were often dark and gloomy. The Great Hall, while impressive, was a noisy, crowded, and often smoky public space where the lord conducted business, ate meals, and where many people, including guards and servants, might sleep on the floor. And hygiene? It was practically non-existent by our standards. Toilets were often just chutes that emptied down the castle walls. People rarely bathed, and the combination of unwashed, bodies, livestock, and smoke meant that even the grandest castles probably smelled terrible. It was a functional, fortified structure, not a palace. Life inside that fortress revolved around a constant state of readiness. The daily routine was punctuated by defense drills, weapon practice, and the maintenance of equipment. A knight's duty was to protect the castle and the lands it controlled, so vigilance was key. But what happened when they left those walls for battle? The reality of a medieval battlefield is something modern minds can barely comprehend. It was a chaotic symphony of noise. The clash of steel, the thundering of hooves, the war cries, and the agonizing screams of the wounded and dying. It was a visceral, terrifying experience. There were no medics rushing to save you, no clean hospitals to recover in. A wound that we would consider minor today, like a deep cut, could easily become infected and lead to a slow, painful death. Many knights died young and violently. Those who survived often carried the physical and mental scars of battle for the rest of their lives. The glory they sought came at an incredibly high price. This brings us back to the famous code of chivalry. This code was an ideal that promoted virtues like courage, honor, loyalty, and mercy toward fellow Christians. It was an attempt by the church and society to civilize these powerful warriors, to give them a moral compass. In tournaments and in courtly life, chivalry was often on full display. Knights would fight for the honor of a lady or show mercy to a defeated opponent in a joust. However, the pressures of war often pushed these ideals to the breaking point. When facing a desperate enemy or when a city was being sacked, the rules of chivalry could be conveniently forgotten. Knights were human beings, driven by fear, greed, and the desire for survival, just like anyone else. While the code of chivalry was a powerful cultural force, it was an ideal they aspired to, not a rule they always followed. The line between a noble knight and a ruthless killer could be perilously thin. So what brought an end to this era of armored warriors? It wasn't another type of soldier that defeated them, but technology. The gradual introduction and improvement of gunpowder weapons spelled the doom of the knight. Early firearms were inaccurate and slow to reload, but they could punch through the finest plate armor with ease. All those years of brutal training, all that expensive custom-fitted steel, could be rendered useless by a common soldier with a simple handgun. At the same time, cannons became powerful enough to smash the stone walls of castles that had been impenetrable for centuries. The very foundations of the knight's military dominance is armor, and the nature of warfare changed forever. Armies of disciplined infantry with pikes and firearms became the new kings of the battlefield. The age of the knight faded, not in one glorious last stand, but over a long, slow decline. They started as boys, trained their whole lives for a world of violence, lived in cold stone fortresses, and fought in brutal, chaotic battles. The real life of a medieval knight wasn't a fairy tale. It was a story of raw survival, discipline, and constant danger. The gleaming armor hid a world of sweat, fear, and blood. They were the elite fighting force of their time, but they were also just men, living and dying in one of history's most turbulent eras. The legends they left behind are powerful, but the reality is even more fascinating. History isn't always pretty, but it's always real. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this glimpse into the real life of a knight as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what historical topic you'd like to see us tackle next. Until then, stay curious.